Let us pray. O God, we come together in your name in this Parliament to debate our nation's affairs and pass laws for the betterment and welfare of all Fijians. Guide us in our deliberations and grant us the wisdom to do what is just and fair. We ask you to bless our beloved nation and grant every Fijian peace, prosperity, and equal opportunity. Help us to serve our citizens with honesty, integrity, and without fear or favor, to keep the trust of those who have sent us here. We seek your divine guidance to continue to build a better nation for all Fijians. In your name, Amen. Honourable members, please be seated. Secretary General.
Confirmation of minutes.
I now call on the Leader of Government in Parliament, the Honourable Inia Ratu, to move his motion. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I move that the minutes of the sitting of Parliament held on Monday, 27 July 2020, as previously circulated, be taken as read and be confirmed.
Is there a seconder?
Honourable Speaker, say I beg to second the motion.
Parliament will now vote on the motion. The question is that the minutes of the sitting of Parliament held on Monday, 27 July 2020, as previously circulated, be taken as read and be confirmed. Does any member oppose the motion? As no member opposes, the motion is agreed to unanimously. Secretary General.
Communications from the Chair.
I welcome all honourable members to today's sitting of Parliament. I also welcome all those watching the live broadcast and the live streaming of today's proceedings. Thank you for taking an interest in the workings of your Parliament. Thank you, honourable members. Secretary General.
Consideration of bills.
Honourable members, I have been advised that there are no bills for consideration today. We will move on to the next item on the order paper. Secretary General.
Resumption of debate on the second reading of the 2020-2021 Appropriation Bill 2020, Bill number 13 of 2020.
Honourable members, as you know, we have a batting list, and I have agreed to a change in the order to the batting list on the request that was given to me, and I now call upon the first speaker this morning, the Honourable Aseri Randrondo, to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Esteemed Speaker of the Fijian Parliament, the Honourable Prime Minister and the Cabinet, fellow Honourable Members of Parliament, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, and my fellow Fijians. I rise to deliver my contribution to the budget debate for the year 2020-21, where I, at the onset, will have to admit that I'm unable to lend my support for various reasons that I will outline. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is not easy for me to say some of the things I need to say today. It grieves me that the human heart is so stubborn at times that we simply refuse to heed well-intended advice given out of love for our country and our people. Mr. Speaker, sir, this will be my 6th year as a parliamentarian. Since I was a rookie in this August House in 2014, I have asked that our government treat the advice that is forthcoming from the opposition benches with due consideration and value. Ironically, Mr. Speaker, sir, no one predicted that the year 2020 would experience a pandemic that only comes around after every 100 years at the very least. Despite the unpredictability of this pandemic, some of us have been urging government to relook at the foundations upon which our development as a nation have been founded upon. Keywords like sustainable development, good corporate governance, be realistic, obviously fell on deaf ears and hearts as cold as stone. Mr. Speaker, sir, hindsight reports will capture my many statements in this August House. I had critiqued and warned that our heavy reliance on tourism, remittances, and even sugar was going to be our downfall when a global financial shock is experienced. The global volatile environment will render us powerless to control our destinies, and the massive job losses we will encounter would be difficult to comprehend. I spoke about the austerity measures that the World Bank and other financial institutions, like the Asian Development Bank, were imposing on Fiji in the form of various reforms that were counterproductive to instilling patriotism, courage to delve into the world of entrepreneurship, and even achieving dreams. I had lamented the lack of genuine incentives that would drive and encourage our people to be inventors and investors. I questioned the handout mentality that the Fiji First government had created in our people, freebies that became increasingly glaring as we drew nearer to national elections. I decried the opening of restricted activities by Investment Fiji that no longer protected our domestic markets. Today, Mr. Speaker, sir, I look at the border lockdowns and feel a burden like no other. My heart is heavy with grief and anger, especially when I see the massive job losses that have resulted with families struggling to make ends meet. Mr. Speaker, sir, well before COVID-19 came, it must be declared that the Fiji First government was robbing our people of their right to be the masters of their own destinies. People no longer had control over their livelihoods. Even within education, contracts were limited and reduced to yearly renewal for civil servants. Redundancies were done subtly through job advertisements, and many who had meritoriously worked for many long years for government lost their jobs to the name of MQR standards. Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, I had given credit where it was due. I had commended the various developments that government had implemented, but a lively highway is not enough if it merely becomes pothole-ridden after a while. Nor is the beautiful Albert Park or even National Stadium meaningful if people are unemployed and do not have the means to be able to enjoy the various recreational activities that these venues host. Mr. Speaker, sir, our economy could have done better in the face of COVID-19. Had we been focused in a big way on enhancing our non-sugar agriculture sector, our building industry, our manufacturing sector, as well as capitalizing on our digital and ICT sectors. We should have been building on our fisheries and forestry sector to gain us access to international markets and reverse our trade deficit and grow our export sector. It's time government needed to do the right thing and stop building castles in the sand, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, I wish to raise my concern on the continuation of grants given to Fiji Sugar Corporation following default in payment of $25 million in bonds held by the Fiji National Provident Fund. This resulted in government being called to make this payment as a guarantor for Fiji Sugar Corporation. This is a classic example of pouring good money after questionable investments. I will not mince my words when I say that this industry over the years has chewed so much investments by government. When the dairy industry continues to receive a meager allocation, and this year it's only $700,000. The inability of government to provide some real solutions to alternative programs will continue to haunt us, especially in light of global pandemics. Mr. Speaker, sir, I also wish to raise a question on the reduction of government's investing receipts from $260 million to $7.3 million. I note that in August of 2019, the FNPF had successfully acquired 20% of Energy Fiji Limited, worth 220 million, which is equivalent to 100 million shares, partially divested from the 500 million shares. The question is, why is the balance of 400 million shares not reflected in government's investment receipts in this budget of 20 and 21 years? Is this a deception, Mr. Speaker? Is this an injustice? Where is the reality in the revenue that is being projected? Mr. Speaker, sir, as the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, I now wish to make some comments on the budget provided to the Fiji Roads Authority. I note the budget provision of 348.9 million is mostly under restricted disbursements. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is now a standing joke about where have all the monies gone to, given the state of our roads around the country continues to have deteriorated to the point of being risk hazard to traveling commuters. Mr. Speaker, sir, we also note an increased level of borrowing from external financial institutions on these FRA budget allocations, amounting to $87 million, an increase from $54 million in the last budget. The question is whether all these fundings provided are being utilized for its intended purposes, like road rehabilitations, as well as for bridges and jetty. The monitoring element of this expenditure is unclear, given the latest FRA annual report available is tabled in Parliament was for the year 2016. It is now 2020, and the delay in reporting questions the good governance on how these funds poured into FRA over the years have been disbursed, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, further questions that needed also to be raised is why are these roads rehabilitation programs continue to be outsourced to foreign companies like the China Railway Group and Higgins, for example, whose key laborers are foreigners. Mr. Speaker, sir, whilst the rehabilitation and restoration programs budget have consistently been significant amounts, the quality of work done remains questionable, especially given that the most roads are back in deplorable states. It seems that the works carried out are no longer as consistent nor up to the professional standard as it used to be during the days of the Public Works Department. The fact remains that the significant increase in cost of repairs and road rehabilitation from PWD days to FRA is exponentially high, but it certainly becomes a nightmare of quality over quantity, thus putting the lives of commuters at risk. Mr. Speaker, sir, I will continue to draw analogies between the two entities because I believe firmly that PWD-style operations should be re-established and do away with FRA outsourcing of private contractors. What we would like to see is 100% domestic workforce that has a genuine sense of responsibility and accountability by workmen who know that the art of their hands and their labor will be their legacy and their show of loyalty and commitment to our communities. Mr. Speaker, sir, government needs to utilize our trained and qualified engineers, our many craftsmen, laborers, mechanics, builders, and those who have gained not only the necessary qualifications, but also have the desire to build legacies through global standard infrastructures, like the bridges, buildings, jetties, and infrastructure that our people have experienced in establishing. For Water Authority of Fiji, there is an increase of $12 million allocation from 183 million last year to 195 million for this budget term. The allocation is targeted at extending rural water supply programs. Similar to FRA, the accountability of these massive funds is unclear, as there has been no up-to-date annual report submitted. The last report tabled in Parliament dates back to 2013 and 2014. Mr. Speaker, sir, this kind of poor corporate governance displayed the lack of transparent display of utilization of funding is a matter of concern, given significant areas of our communities in the rural settings continue to await properly treated pipe water connections. Again, Mr. Speaker, we raise concerns on the utilization of these significant expenditures on foreign companies like China Railway Group, when our local companies should be supported with work that develops the capacity of our domestic market in both experience, expertise, and employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, sir, briefly speaking on the transport sector, for government shipping services, an allocation of 8.6 million has been granted, a reduction of 1.2 million. The reduction in allocation raises questions on government's priority to look after the provision of government services to our maritime islands. Mr. Speaker, sir, for the shipping franchise scheme, they have been allocated a budget of 2.6 million, which is an increase of 0.6 million from the previous year's budget. I acknowledge government for heeding my earlier call to give certainty for shipping companies servicing uneconomical routes to more remote parts of the country by granting longer-term agreements through the shipping franchise, where it is now going to be 15 years, an agreement to be established with the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Tourism and Transport. This initiative will give meaningful security to financial institutions to loan to small shipping companies, for instance, and in turn allow the companies to invest in new ships, therefore ensuring more reliable and efficient services for our maritime island. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am now commend government that government encourages public-private partnership arrangements with Asana and Tikina Holdings or cooperatives to engage in this shipping investment opportunity. This support, of course, must come with the necessary training and monitoring to be provided for those that will run the shipping business so that they sustain themselves and be viable in the long run. Mr. Speaker, on a similar note, it is timely when I see such arrangements provided to the shipping industry by government. I question why couldn't government do the same for civil service employment contracts, which is now on short-term durations only, with some on annual basis and some a little longer. Such short-term contracts is not conducive to long-term planning for families, and as such, many are unable to cope with the restrictive environment of work today, especially in light of the COVID-19. On the Land Transport Authority, Mr. Speaker, sir, the government operating grant of 20 million has been allocated, which is an increase of 2.2 million from the previous budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, I question this increase, given that some LTA offices have been closing down during this COVID-19 period, and a lot of services are not being rendered, like the defensive driving courses, which is a key requirement for license renewal and license upgrade. I take this time to raise my concerns also on the manner in which bookings have been mercilessly done by LTA and police officers on our roads during these difficult times. They need to consult more with Fiji Roads Authority. Mr. Speaker, sir, you cannot gloss over underlying problems that the LTA has, where management that have been ill-treating staffs and working on reduced hours, yet the operating grant has increased. Something does not add up, Mr. Speaker, sir. Big Sam, no doubt, drives a questionable bus. On Fiji Maritime Safety Authority of Fiji, a grant of 3.9 million has been granted, which is a slight increase of $300,000 from last year. The latest available report for MSF, annual report for MSF, dates back to 2013, Mr. Speaker, sir. The trend of the late annual report submissions is worrying, especially government's continued provision of budgetary allocations despite the lack of accountability to taxpayers. Whilst the entities may be meeting its internal reporting requirements, it is disconcerting that government sees no urgency to demand the same level of accountability to table the necessary annual reports in a timely manner in this August House, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Infrastructure has been given a budget of 30.6 million, which is a reduction of 4.7 million from its previous budget. The Energy Department has a budget allocation of 13.2 with a reduction of 3.7 million. These operating expenditures are mostly for grid extensions and house wiring in rural areas. On this note, Mr. Speaker, I wish to raise some plights of some communities who await the provision of electrification. For example, in the villages of Korvo to Narogorokaya village, also in Nasiriti, Nasongo, and Roma, and also in Noisong village in Etasiri. Mr. Speaker, sir, for Korvo village, it's now been 2 years since the grid extension has been established, as well as house wiring completed for individual homes. And yet, the provision of electricity is still being awaited. Can we have an explanation, Honorable Minister, on the cause of the delay and update when are these villages likely to get electricity? We are waiting an explanation from the Honorable Minister. Mr. Speaker, sir, note that the government has announced in the official budget address that the Civil Service Cadetship Program is being re-established. This for me is welcome news because I have in the past spoken about the PWD apprenticeship scheme that teaches tertiary school graduates through attachments within the various divisions of PWD. These types of nurturing and upskilling or on-the-job training, so to speak, drives and helps our labor market become resilient and provides a ready pool of trained employees. Mr. Speaker, sir, this initiative is timely and warranted. Many of our top career civil servants went through such training grounds, which is now more prudent than ever post-COVID-19. where it will be best that we train our people for our job markets, rather than bring in the many expatriates that we have to rely on, like the 0.5 million paid Chief Executive Officer of the Land Transport Authority, who is a terrible burden on our taxpayers' coffers. Mr. Speaker, sir, my colleague yesterday spoken on the length about the budget announcement. There's very little offered for the ordinary person. It is mostly targeting businesses who are seen as the employers to continue to survive and provide not only employment but also much needed tax revenue for government. Whilst I understand that the mechanics of capitalism will require businesses to be supported by way of economic activities, that will drive our income and expenditures ultimately. Mr. Speaker, sir, on that note, I would like to note that the Turagani Koro and maternity gina allowance remain stagnant at 1.4 million and 428,000 respectively. If government preaches about being a responsible employer, I reiterate my call that they should also be entitled to be paid their superannuation contribution to the FNPF. I tend to be an avid listener, Mr. Speaker, of global news and have followed with interest how countries have provided support for their people through this pandemic. Many have had their rents been paid by governments. Many have had electricity concessions, groceries supplied, whilst others had monetary assistance provided. And so for us as a development state, that is said to have an economic boom for the last 10 years, we have zero to show by way of assistance to our people to benefit from. No cash handouts this time around, no grocery assistance for the now unemployed, no proper support for farmers like Ndalo, Angona, and dairy farmers. Mr. Speaker, sir, we need to be able to address as well the many needs of our farmers. And I take this time to also raise the issue of pesticides like paraquat that have been banned for use. An alternative product farmers have been encouraged to use is the samurai, which I am told now kills the Ndalo plant and even the Ndalo itself if the liquid product somehow manages to get into the plant. I have been asked by farmers to seek reconsideration of their plight and perhaps allow paraquat to be offered through special licensing offered for farmers only. Take it for advice, Honorable Minister. Mr. Speaker, sir, there is something that has been niggling when I took this budget. My doubts about the genuineness of our economic boom is raised when pre-COVID-19 government had raised prices of passport to a massive over 100% compared to previous cost. Now, post-COVID-19, with travel restrictions, departure tax has been reduced to only $100, yet the price of passport remains outstanding, as high as around $250 or more as compared to the previous $70. Similarly, with a decrease in oil prices resulting from COVID, bus fares have yet to drop. Also, birth certificates and marriage certificates, as well as police clearance costs, are astoundingly high following recent COVID cases. Finally, Mr. Speaker, sir, I must now pay tribute to the nation's success in containing COVID-19. For that, I congratulate government and its officials who continue to work around the clock to address and eliminate any further lingering COVID-19 threats in our communities. Mr. Speaker, sir, how often have we as a people ignored the uncertainty of our existence, mistaking it for probabilities generated by our statistical models? How often have we ignored our vulnerability by pretending that we are in control of our destinies? The COVID-19 pandemic shows us how wrong we were. It is now widely acknowledged that the coronavirus shows us how terrible it really is to waste our lives embroiled in endless battles for wealth and status and power. How terrible it really is not to recognize the value of the people around us, not just our family and friends, not just colleagues and fellow citizens, but also complete strangers. How terrible it is not to give our lives meaning every hour of every day by honoring the sacredness of life and according all living things the respect, sensitivity, and care that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, sir, what the Fiji First government fails to realize is that most of our endeavors, we are interdependent. One individual cannot succeed without the cooperation of others. We cooperate at many different scales, local, regional, and international. The COVID-19 pandemic highlights the danger of ignoring our interdependence and the importance of global cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrates to us that our economic, political, and social system can serve our needs and purposes only when they induce us to cooperate at the appropriate scale. Mr. Speaker, sir, I challenge us all in this August House and I encourage our community leaders, let us be more honest with ourselves and leave aside our tribal, racial, religious, and political differences. This is a time we need to stand united as one. I will leave us with a word of God taken from the good book of Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. Let us heed. Nagabalevu.
I thank the Honourable Australian Honourable for his contribution to the debate, and I now give the floor to the Honourable Ratu Chevichan Burelevu. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise to contribute on the debate of National Budget 2020-2021. I must convey my sincere gratitude towards Most High, our God Almighty, for His gracious love that allows for my presence here today. Before I speak on some of the issues in responding to the budget 2020-2021, I wish to plead to the government to reconsider its stand and declare the Holy God Jehovah and the Son Jesus Christ is the Most High and the Almighty is the sovereign of this nation. As far as I believe, God allows this situation, the global pandemic, purposely to test the power, the ability, the strength, the knowledge, and the wisdom of the leaders when leaders reject and neglect God and the power of God. God has the power to give and the power to take away. God has the power to close and the power to open. God has the power to increase and the power to reduce. God has the power to allow and the power to decline. God has the power of everything all over this world. I plead to you, the Honourable Prime Minister, please reconsider the decision. Recognize and acknowledge God. Place God in His rightful place and put God first before Fiji first. There is no way to find a solution of all this situation. God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, is the true solution. Hallelujah. Mr. Speaker, I wish to propose a way forward for us, the leaders of the government, leaders of various groups, various communities, the leaders of churches, and every one of us should come to a sense of realization, asking question. Are we doing things according to the will of God? Are we doing things right? Are we doing things honestly? Are we practicing the fundamental principles of good governance? Are we respecting the rule of law? Are we respecting our freedom and liberty granted by the love of God? Answering many questions of realization would change our motive and transform our mind and humble ourselves before God, who will bless us and our nation. Mr. Speaker, the book of Chronicles 7 reads, I quote, "If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin, and I will heal their land." Amen. Mr. Speaker, this current situation is only reminding us that God still has the supreme power all over this world. I quote, Mr. Speaker, Psalms reads, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, He is my refuge, He is my fortress. In God, in Him I trust." We can say that He is our defender and protector. We can say He will keep us safe from all hidden dangers and from all deadly diseases. God says, in the last verse, God says, "I will save those who loves me and will protect those who acknowledge me as Lord." Mr. Speaker, I hope this message is very clear, and I request our leadership, the government, to realign our stand and acknowledge God and put God first before anything else. To the national budget, to the response to the budget, Mr. Speaker, like some of my colleagues at this side of the House have stated, COVID-19 pandemic is a blessing in disguise for the Fiji First government. And just 4 months ago, they ushered into this House a special budget under the blanket of COVID-19 response budget. If the unprecedented growth in our economy was real, as they always like to boast about, then there was no need for a new budget, especially when we were a few months away from the next budget announcement. Mr. Speaker, that shows the level of desperation and the truth of the matter is there is no money, as Honorable Noekula used to remind them more often. Mr. Speaker, the 2020-21 budget is yet again a doomsday budget. I would like to place on the record my support to the statement by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that the budget is a responsible, rudderless, receptive budget. It has failed to address the impact of crisis to help our local community and ordinary citizens to recover quickly. Food security. Mr. Speaker, the experience of ordinary citizens in our rural communities on the impact of global pandemic proves the disconnection between government and our local communities. Our nation has been relying heavily on processed imported goods and services in recent years. These have increased the vulnerability index of our ordinary citizens in times of crisis. That is why, in my local community, the Bano of Namuka, we are weaving our social net so that we are not caught off guard in any crisis, as we witness that the Fiji First government does not have the capacity to lead us out. From our land experience and the inspiration of our Lord, Mr. Speaker, we are now focusing on reviving our social structure and mechanism to address food security and enable us to save for rainy days. If the situation deteriorated and comes to us, when there will be no food items in shops and supermarkets, we still can feed our families with our food sources available and rich in our land and our fishing ground. However, the inconsistency policy, which is a hallmark of the Fiji First government, have hindered us from fully implement our local social mechanism. One of such policy is the ban of the harvest of bisdama and sea cucumbers. This ban was done without any consultation with the Vanua and the Golden owners. Mr. Speaker, bisdama and sea cucumbers have been our livelihood for generations. The ban on the harvest has forced our local communities to work extra harder and improvising on our local produce that will help them make and meet every day. And now, in the midst of these trying times, the government had a visit to consult us, the lifting of the ban. The Bano of Namuka welcomed this initiative to lift this ban for at least 1 year, as it will benefit us hugely, and I'm thanking the Honourable Minister of Fisheries in advance for compassion in agreeing to uplift the ban as soon as possible. Thank you, Honourable Rizal, for your good, compassionate heart. Honourable Speaker, I would like to put on the record that public consultation would always be considered before the government impose any piece of legislation. The right of indigenous for free, prior, informed consent would be should be respected by government. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I appeal to the government for not only on behalf of the Bano of Namuka, but on behalf of all rural remote communities for their consideration in divesting resources into agro-marketing. This, Mr. Speaker, will strengthen the scope of work and will help us in confidence that our local produce will not go to waste. On the other hand, it will boost the economy of our nation. The infrastructure. In addition, Mr. Speaker, one of the hindrances of our local in the deteriorating state of our roads, and especially in the north. Pathetic road condition in the north had been ignored for a very long period. The road from Narambali to Korotasere, Nateo Bay, from Waningado to Nasinu, Botany Tomba, I have witnessed when I traveled through those roads on the 15th this month. The road from Nasasa to Waloboni, they have been waiting for a very long time despite their request to upgrade the road. These are some of the indications and lack of funds, and obviously an indication of the declining growth of the national economy. Where is the unprecedented growth in our economy? Mr. Speaker, as a Shadow Minister for Police Portfolio, may allow me to speak briefly on this note. I acknowledge the increase of 37 million in the allocation for the Fiji Police Force. However, Mr. Speaker, I am dismayed at few of the allocation that have warranted this increase. Firstly, the 40 million allocation for the construction of the new police station in Nakasi, Nandi, Lautoka, and Nalau. The timing of such allocation is just not right, Mr. Speaker. We could have diverted this allocation into strengthening local industries that will create employment. Speaking of employment, I would like to briefly respond to the claim made by the Honourable Prime Minister earlier yesterday, stating that the construction of this new police station will create employment for construction workers. Mr. Speaker, we need real solution and not a band-aid solution. Employment for the construction will only be for a few months compared to the creation of employment by strengthening our local industries, as this offer a more realistic job security. Therefore, the construction of this new police station can be deferred when we are in a good days again. Mr. Speaker, I wish to acknowledge 13 million increase in the allocation for salary and wages. This is a great sight, especially during these trying times. However, I hope the resources are also diverted into building trust between the force and the community, mending the social fabric that have been torn for some time. Recruiting more police officers will not be able to curb the crime on the street if we do not build trust and foster a peaceful community. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would like to echo the voice of one of our successful businessmen, local businessmen in Lambasa, and a former member of parliament, Mr. Charanjit Singh, in saying the COVID-19 budget is betrayal of poor and full of empty and meaningless bluster. Where is the equality of sacrifice, consistency, and policy of privatization of expenditure that the government demands from all other and exempt the rich, the powerful, and the privileged? Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues in the position that I cannot support the budget due to the fact that the budget is responsible, rudderless, receptive budget, and it's a doomsday budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Dr. Jevito Level for his contribution to the debate. And I now give the floor to the Assistant Minister for Youth and Sports, the Honourable Alipate Nangata. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Prime Minister, the Cabinet Ministers, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, and the Honourable Members of Parliament. I rise to make a brief statement in support of the motion before the House. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed, I wish to acknowledge and thank God for bringing us all this far. The same God who brought Moses and the Israelites out of Egypt, the God of Noah, David, Daniel, and Esther, who has never changed. He has been with us in both good and bad times. When we are faced with natural disasters or pandemic, He is here, watching over His faithful people. I thank the Honourable Prime Minister for his sound judgment and good leadership. I thank all the dedicated health workers in taking the leading role in the fight against this dreadful disease. I thank the disciplined forces, the hard-working civil servants for their commitment and perseverance. I also take this opportunity to thank everyone, especially our youths who have become resilient and have turned into backyard gardening and farming for food security. Thank you to everyone who have assisted our local farmers in buying their produce and all those who have taken advantage of the local butter trade platform to help those in need. Also, I wish to commend and congratulate the Honourable Minister for Economy, Public Enterprises, Civil Service and Communications, the Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Economy, and the hard-working team for a faithful and forward-looking budget. A budget that is inclusive and leaves no one behind. A budget that is well thought and that will address the crisis that is currently faced by the global economies. A budget that proves that the Fiji First government is committed to being responsible, not just fiscally, but socially and environmentally. The 2020-2021 budget lays the foundations for Fijians to have better lives and assist them through the crisis. This budget will make sure that all Fijians continue to have access to the high-quality public services they need and deserve, such as health, education, housing, etc. Mr. Speaker, as a ministry, we thank the government for the budgetary allocation and would like to state in this House that we will ensure our mandated duties are carried out within our means, and with that, we will rise above all expectations. Mr. Speaker, the two core programs coordinated and facilitated by the Ministry of Youth and Sports are centered on the provision of assistance to youth through advisory, empowerment, and capacity building, including specific skills training and the development of sports and its infrastructures nationwide through the provision of grants to the Fiji National Sports Commission and national sporting organizations, as well as the provision of basic sports equipment and the development of rural playing fields. The ministry focuses on these developments to ensure that our youths are empowered and have access to good sporting infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the 2020-2021 budget has again included new initiatives and areas that the allocation will be utilized to further its work and fulfill its mandated duties. The allocation will allow our ministry to continue and further the work that has impacted the lives of our young population. The initiatives and areas are on supporting community-based capacity building, promoting youth leadership, promoting the development of sports at all levels, expanding access to sporting infrastructure for the Fijian people to encourage healthy living. Mr. Speaker, under the community-based capacity building initiatives, the Ministry of Youth and Sports' core responsibilities are the establishment of a policy environment that provides strategic support systems, initiatives for personal development, character building, sports policy implementation, and community-based youth-led programs. Mr. Speaker, one of the community-based capacity building initiatives in the 2019-2020 budget was the $20,000 allocated to the review of the Fiji National Youth Band. The ministry has completed the review of the National Youth Band, and the stage 1 of the recommended action plan outlines initiating assessment of institution curriculum towards Fiji Higher Education Commission accreditation and full recognition certification. This will require a full curriculum review by an expert consultant and will address the National Development Plan in promoting education and training of young people to secure decent employment. This will achieve an outcome of new blended creative industries and technical vocational education and training TVET curriculum. The $25,000 allocation in the 2020-2021 budget will go towards the first stage of the review recommendation, and that is the review of the National Youth Band curriculum, which will allow the ministry to work in collaboration with the Fiji National University and engage an expert consultant to conduct the review of the curriculum. Mr. Speaker, the promotion of youth leadership is an important aspect of the ministry's empowerment program. In promoting the program, the ministry continues to take the leading role in the implementation of the Duke of Edinburgh International Awards program, where each individuals undergo development on life skills and character development. The Duke of Edinburgh International Award promotes leadership through the adventurous journey and when participants are able to manage the delivery process of the program and effectively participate in the program. Mr. Speaker, the Duke of Edinburgh International Award is a daring program that could change the lives of our young people between the ages of 14 to 24 years and have gained our people with awards on bronze, silver, or gold level. The award is a balanced program with a framework of 4 sections: service, skills, fiscal recreation, and adventurous journey, plus residential project at gold level only. Nearly 600 young people take up the award each year, with over 100 award volunteers actively participating in the program. Over 3,000 people have gained an award, with approximately 50 schools, youth clubs, and organizations being involved with the program. In 2019 and 2020, a total of 548 participants were being awarded. 56 from the Central Division, 23 from the Eastern Division, 22 from the Northern Division, and 447 from the Western Division. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth and Sports views sports development as an integral component of developing and empowering young people and the country as a whole. This perception has been established from the fact that young people closely associate themselves with participation in sports. Mr. Speaker, through the technical assistance offered by the Fiji National Sports Commission and other sporting bodies in terms of sports outreach program, we as a ministry are actively engaging with communities and sports stakeholders around the country to promote sports. Not only that, sir, in doing so, we are also reaching out to our minority groups and red zone areas through the Fiji Community Policing to ensure that they too participate in our programs and register youth and sports clubs. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a true reflection of the commitment of the Fijian government to develop sports in our country. Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, our ministry, together with the Ministry of Health and Medical Services and Fiji National Sports Commission, put together a Safe Sports Fiji Protocol Framework compliant certification system. These were necessary to assist our national sporting organization into return to training and later to competition. All national sporting organizations are requested to have this compliance certificate in place before they are allowed to hold any training or competition. While the roles of the national sporting organization is clearly outlined, we must also understand that we all play an important role as athletes, coaches, administrators, or even as fans to be guided by these protocols. Mr. Speaker, in expanding access to sporting infrastructure for the Fijian people to encourage healthier living, $100,000 has been allocated to the construction of hard courts. This project is aligned to the provision of sports and recreational activity facilities in densely populated areas as a means to change people's lifestyle by participating in sports or recreational activity and also fight against NCDs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity, and I fully support the motion before the House.
I thank the Assistant Minister for Youth and Sports for his contribution to the debate. I now give the floor to the Honourable Niko Nawekula. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Like you, Honourable Speaker, I've been listening to the debate, and a lot of rubbish that's coming from the other side. More specifically from Honourable Koroila Besau, Honourable Kwaya, Honourable Premila Kumar, Honourable Alvik. And makes me, well, you too, everyone from that side, they're talking rubbish. Rubbish because, Honourable Speaker, and it makes me worried, very, very worried that they do not appreciate the mess that our economy is at. This side of the House, as well as the whole public, is reminding you of the mess, of the economic mess that you did. They don't appear to understand that in 2018, they lost revenue of nearly $1 billion. They don't appear to understand that in 2020, another $1 billion was lost. They have to cut budget by $1 billion. And they still feel that it's a boom. Something must be wrong. They're like Nero, playing the fiddle while Rome is burning. They remind me of those two cities in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah. They're in self-denial. They don't know the problem that we are facing. They should appreciate that. And, Honourable Speaker, I think the problem lies with one person, the Minister for Economy. He's not an economist. And please tell this to him. When he's not here, tell this to him. He's not a qualified economist, and he thinks he knows everything. And he does not take advice. his former colleague, Graham Davis, says that he pushes in his ideas, he crashes his ideas through. So all the policies that are there, that has brought us to our knees in relation to our economy, has come from one person. So appreciate that. He's a Jonah. He's a Jonah in the sinking ship. And you know what to do with Jonah? Read the Bible. Please do the needful. If you want to save us, well, the problem is we are also passengers in that sinking ship. And you know what to do with it.
Order.
I won't advise you, but you know, do the needful, you know what to do with Jonah. Second point that I wish to Honorable Speaker is that I like everybody, was trying to look for a word or two to describe the budget that we have. And I've been listening to them. You know, Honorable Saleh Govin said, it's a well thought out budget. All rubbish. Kirpal, Honorable Kirpal, a wonderful progressive budget. Honorable Pramila, thoughtful, progressive, bold budget. But it's a lie. We should be honest with ourselves. The term that I can, I'm not an economist, I'm not an accountant, but I read page 1 to the last one of 3 nights.
Order.
And this is what happened. It's a bogus. It's pretentious. It's dishonest. And the reason is this. The budget does not express our true capacity. We can reduce much, much more in terms of expenditures, but the budget is not saying that. We can reduce our deficit much, much more, but the budget is not doing that. And there's a motive. There's a very, very cynical motive. And the motive, I feel, or I conclude, is that this budget is playing victim. We are telling the whole world that we are in a sorry state so that they can give aid to us. And ironically, the Minister of Economy said we will not rely on aid, but that is the effect. That is the whole purpose of this dishonest and bogus budget. And for that reason, it's totally irresponsible. We should be honest. You lack intellectual honesty, to quote the Honorable Minister. We are fooling the world that we are the victim so that they can give to us. And they already succeeded. Australia has already given 20 million. But let's be honest and tell the world what we can do this. Honorable Speaker, before I move on, let me rebut some of the statements or rubbish that's coming from that side. You know, Honorable Semi Koroila Besau, no, totally said. He thanked the budget for supporting the primary, but wait, there's no support there. Honorable Koroila Besau, you have 15.5 million. Your allocation, and it's 582,000 less than the last budget. So where is the stimulus? There's no stimulus there. By stimulus, we mean export-driven projects. If the Honorable Minister had said, okay, we are getting $500,000 to increase the export of pearls or prawns, or to revive the eco-cooperation, that is stimulus. This budget is only maintaining his status quo. And I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry for you. You know, he referred to the removal of transshipment levy. But you know, it's primary, that's secondary. That's done by the Ministry of Economy. The things that you do yourself, please. So, totally wrong. And I feel it's the same for the Honorable Minister for Dr. Reddy. You know, you have 16 million, and the totality of the primary ministries is about 3 million more, but that's to be like a chemistry lab. Yes. It's not to incorporate new produce or new agricultural export. So where is the stimulus? I hope so. But it doesn't say in the budget. Doesn't say in the budget. The budget does not say that you are being stimulated. So where does the 2.7 billion go to? It's not going to the agriculture. It's not going to the fisheries. It's not going to the forestry. So where is it? Well, I hope so. Well, if he tells me it will not be from the budget, because I'm reading from the budget book. Very bad. You know, Honorable Koya accused us of living in the past. But you should know that if you don't learn from the past, you never progress. And the people will account to you for the 35 million you lost. 35 million he wasted, he threw into the sea for golf, for that golf tournament. He used to say here, Honorable Speaker, that we are punching above our weight. But you have taken this and you throw it up. A third party who organized it must have benefited from the 35 million. And where are we now? Even in 2018, tourism was going down. Even in 2019, tourism was going down. So he's personally responsible for losing 35 million of hard, 45 million of hard-earned income. And you should answer for that. And I'm not joking, you should answer for that. Tell the public, where's the use? You took this money and threw it away. And Honorable Koya said the growth was 3.2%. That's a gross. He did not look at the net, which was 1.75. And even if you take the 3.2, it is still less than the period when Ratumara was in government. Still less than the growth when... The point is, where is the unprecedented? So don't say unprecedented. Where's the boom? There's no boom. There's only doom.
Listen. Order.
Well, you're probably looking at the wrong numbers. Well, Honorable Speaker, let me now go to my speech. I am the Shadow Attorney General, and I will talk on that sector, as well as the independent bodies and commissions. But I want to say something first, in general, about this problem. The first point that I wish to say is that the Fiji First government is guilty of reckless mismanagement of our economy. That is from 2006 to date. Boom, that they say is doomed for us and our children. And they must first admit it. So we are asking you, please admit it. Accept the responsibility. Do what you need to do with Jonah. Because he's the one, he's the captaining the sinking ship. Honorable Speaker, this is now their 14th year. And I wish now to compare that with Ratumara's government, who ran for about the same period. Ratumara, every time I sit down and think of it, I've coined a word for him, that he is one of the great fathers of this nation. And that's not because, Honorable Speaker, that he's your father-in-law. It's because he has vision. He has vision.
You won't get extra minutes.
And there are big differences. Ratumara's government was responsible. It was fully democratic. More importantly, it was investment driven. Just look at the investment that he did. PEFCO, Fiji Pine, Mahogany. He did all those. And at that time, and we are benefiting now. And you, that side of the house, ask yourself, what have you done? Consume. And you are consumption driven. You're not like Ratumara. Ratumara did invest for us. You're not only consumption driven, you sell all the assets that Ratumara had maintained for us. And there's nothing left. You look at the budget, there's nothing left to sell. Instead, they ran up huge debts, 2.5 million up to last year. And that's about half of what the other prime ministers and governments were there. Ratumara, Tarase, Rambuka. And now the total debt is around 7 billion, giving the national debt total to 9 billion. And what for? What were all those debt for? Consumption, consumption, and more consumption. Driven, of course, Honorable Speaker, by politically motivated reckless spending and nil investment, nil investment, nil investment. Where is your investment? What have you done to this nation compared to what Ratumara did? You just eat, eat, eat. And, Honorable Speaker, the figures speak for themselves. You know, if you average the growth of our economy, as I've already said, 0.75%. And so there is nothing unprecedented there. There is no boom there. What is dangerous is this so-called growth was consumption-driven as opposed to investment-driven. And when they eat finish, when they consume it, it all came crashing down in 2018. $1 billion of revenue you lost. Shame on you.
Investments in airports.
And that's before COVID. This is not COVID. This is before COVID. And, Honorable Speaker, they were forced, last year we were forced to cut budget by nearly 1 billion because of that. So where's the growth? Growth in the airport, well, I tell you what, there is $1 billion nearly waiting for us there in terms of guarantee for Fiji Airport, for Fiji Airways. That is the cost for that fleet that is now grounded. And we have just approved a guarantee of 455 million. So that's a mess. From 2019, we were in recession.
Order.
Honorable Speaker, we were in recession then, we are in recession now. And this is all before COVID came in this year. And these were funded by debt and debt and debt. So it gives meaning to the often said word that GDP hindi now. So our GDP came from what we were borrowed. And that's really true. So I'm asking you please, please accept responsibility for your economic mismanagement. And the results are out now, reduced 1.7 growth in 2018, recession, remember that, recession of minus 1.3 contraction in 2019, forecasted to be further 0.24. So there it is. So why all the jumping up and down? There's nothing to celebrate. Honorable Speaker, the second point that I wish to say is that, the deficit of 2.7 billion is way too much. Why was it not reduced? Because it can be done very easily. And it must have a cynical motive, in my view. The deficit in this budget is 2.7 billion. But revenue has been dropping, nearly 1 billion in 2018. After that short collection, it was reflected in the budget reduction last year of nearly 1 billion. We used to average 4 billion in revenue. And it has come down to 3 billion, to 2 billion, next year, 1.66 billion. So you answer me. Tell us, COVID-19 came in 2020. I'm talking about 2018, 2019. Huh? No, but before that we were already minus. We were already in recession last year. We were already 1 billion loss in revenue in 2018.
Order.
Well, I've already given them the solution. Jonah, do what to do with Jonah. Honorable Speaker, revenue is expected to decrease again next year by nearly 1 billion. Now, this time, this is only when COVID-19 comes in. Now we're talking COVID-19. Before that, you were already bad. You already wasted.
Order.
And all this jumping up and down when 0.5 billion from 38% of the GDP from tourism will be wiped out. There is nothing to celebrate here. We have to be concerned. We have to be responsible. And that's not coming out from their speeches. It's not coming out. You're totally irresponsible. And with all that equation, you would expect that the lenders, overseas lenders, would be able to give us only even less. Last year, we borrowed about 800 million. So with all this coming in, we expected only to achieve 400 million. But no, we are asking for 2.7 billion. Why? Now, fair enough, we need to stimulate our economy, but Honorable Speaker, we must also make sacrifices. We must also make sacrifices.
Order.
And to me, this budget is saying, okay, we can enjoy a good life while the government goes and borrow more. That is what the budget is saying. You know, it is very, very foolish indeed, because there are many comforts that we can do away with and reduce our budget. Firstly, we can easily reduce the deficit by 1.25 billion if we ask for a moratorium on the charges. 1.7 billion is the cost of servicing our loan. Now, if we go and ask the lenders, please give us a moratorium, that will reduce it. That will reduce it to 1.52 billion. So why hasn't our Minister for Economy done that? Another way of reducing the deficit is to refrain from listing within the budget everything that's under requisition, because they wouldn't be done anyway. And the total for that is about 1.4 billion. So if you minus, don't list the requisition, you will only have a deficit. It will be reduced by 1.3 billion. And the question we ask, why hasn't the Minister for Economy done that? There are other simple things that we can do, like removing unnecessary expenditures. 7 million for the Prime Minister's office. Do we need that? We don't need it. 40 million for the police reform. We don't need that. Vehicle licensing and 57 million. So I'm saying, therefore, my conclusion is that they have intentionally deceived everybody of our capacity in order to borrow more, not to borrow more, in order to get aid. Now, Honorable Speaker, I'll use this last time that left for me to talk about the primary, the Ministry of Fisheries and the Ministry of Agriculture. You know, the short word that I is there, they are no stimulus. All their totality of their budget has been increased by 4 billion, but that 4 billion is for capital construction, to build a chemistry lab and other things. It's not to stimulate the economy. So I'm very sad for you, Honorable Minister. You know, you have nothing. From the 27 billion, they have nothing more to stimulate what they can do. So we ask them, where is this 2.7 billion going? It's not going to the primary industry. It's not going to agriculture. It's not going to fisheries. It's not going to forestry. You know, we need projects like Ratu Mara did. We need to replant our pine. Do you have any, you don't have anything there to replant our pine. You need to have money invested in there for the mahogany. So, for the prime ministers for the primary industries, very sorry. And the problem is Jonah. Do the needful.
I thank the Honorable Nikonowai Kula for his contribution to the debate. On that note, honorable members will suspend proceedings for refreshments in the big committee room, and Parliament will resume in half an hour. We adjourn. Honorable members, please be seated. Honorable members, we will continue with the debate on the budget, and I give the floor to the Minister for Forestry, the Honorable Osea Naingam. You have the floor, sir.
Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Cabinet colleagues, Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Speaker say, I rise to affirm the Ministry of Forestry's full support for the 2021 budget that was presented on the 17th of this month. And I wish to commend the Honorable Minister for Economy and the staff of the Ministry, particularly for a visionary budget that sets the platform for a smart recovery. The Ministry of Forestry has been allocated $15.7 million and intends to strengthen its work in the various areas that will help with the environmental, social, and economic recovery from COVID-19 and the tropical cyclones that have caused much damage in recent months. Suffice to say, Honorable Speaker say, it is not so much the amount that a ministry receives, but how it uses the allocated funds to secure maximum returns that matters the most. The new budget will, for instance, enable the ministry to assist Fijians who lost their houses during tropical cyclone Harold to put a decent roof over their heads. About $1.5 million is allocated for the maritime pine development and purchase of harvesting machines and equipment. These funds will complement government's housing rehabilitation in the islands. Following TC Harold in April, the ministry deployed equipment and staff to help with repurposing fallen and damaged trees. It has purchased additional portable sawmills and is enlisting the support of the Republic of Fiji military forces to help build roads to ease the extraction of trees. In about 11 weeks, and working with the islanders, we managed to repurpose timber for close to 200 houses. The new budget will accelerate the efforts to ensure we repurpose timber for all the damaged houses within the next few months. In the meantime, the ministry is collaborating with other agencies, including the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development and the Ministry of Housing and Community Development, to start rebuilding houses up to Category 4 cyclone standard. This is the commitment government is making to the people to build back better and stronger. The ministry also recognizes that the global pandemic has caused job losses and the closure of operations for many companies. It is therefore exploring opportunities to meaningfully engage some companies with the recovery operations in the islands. This will help reinstate some jobs. Honorable Speaker, say the Ministry of Forestry's core responsibility is to sustainably manage our forest resources. This is pivotal in building a resilient economy and society that can withstand the impacts of climate change and global pandemics. Sustainable forest management can help lift communities out of poverty while also protecting the environment and enhancing biodiversity. So far, more than 300,000 has been paid out under the Reach to Reef program. About $2 million of the new budget will enable the ministry to continue implementing the Cash for Tree Planting program, which provides the opportunity for Fijians who have lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 to earn some cash by planting trees in their communities. This money will enable the ministry to scale up its efforts towards the planting of 30 million trees in 15 years under the reforestation of degraded forest and the Ridge to Reef program, which is supported by the United Nations Development Program. Honorable Speaker said, the Fiji Sun newspaper on Monday, 20th July, told the story of how the tree planting program has helped sustain Mr. Mesake Rarolo and his family of Koromakawa village in the district of Wairiki in Labasa. Mr. Rarolo was a food and beverage worker in one of the resorts. He lost his job due to COVID-19 and had to return to his roots and toil the land. He is one of many Fijians who have migrated to the rural areas. I had the opportunity to meet him during my visit to the Northern Division last month. As part of the tree planting program, he is able to earn some money for his family. So far, more than 300,000 has been paid out under the Ridge to Reef program, and government has spent about $1 million buying seedlings, mostly from community nurseries under the reforestation of degraded forest program and planting trees. These programs not only empower people economically, but they also drive home the importance of nature. The new budget will definitely assist more people like Mr. Rarolo and his family. Honorable Speaker say, in the last 19 months, Fijians from all walks of life have contributed to planting over 2 million trees and mangroves. We have had children as young as 2 years old, youth, women, and men in their twilight years taking part in tree planting because they believe in restoring nature. All these Fijians are part of Fiji's green recovery. The ministry has also established a dashboard for members of the public to register the trees they have planted. These records can be viewed publicly. Honorable Speaker, Fiji's tree planting revolution is also aimed at offsetting our carbon outputs. The expected signing of the emission reduction program agreement with the World Bank will set the platform for Fiji to start trading in carbon in a larger scale. This could be an attractive alternative to logging. This is part of Fiji's contribution towards addressing climate change. Lest we forget, the COVID-19 pandemic does not take away the fact that climate change still poses an existential threat to our people and planet. This simply means that we have to build back smarter. Honorable Speaker said, the tree planting revolution is also aimed at developing greener towns, cities, and communities. Forestry is collaborating with the ministries of local government, housing and community development, agriculture and environment to support our green recovery and food security. Fiji's tree planting initiative is in effect an extension of the global movement to protect our forest and pristine natural environment, and where possible, to restore ecosystems balance. Honorable Speaker say, today's reality as a result of COVID-19 is that the forestry sector's contribution to Fiji's economy as measured by gross domestic product is projected to decrease. However, the ministry intends to facilitate the gradual increase by engaging more meaningful with the private sector and providing assistance such as longer-term licenses to encourage economic investments and job creation. The new budget will enable the ministry to continue to support Fiji Pine Limited through the removal of invasive species, among other things. This will help Fiji's leading player in the forestry sector to continue to gain traction in securing foreign exchange for the country through consistent exports. and continue to put more money into the pockets of the landowners, something that no other government has done except for the Bainimarama and Fiji First government. Honorable Speaker said, the ministry is also supporting the Fiji Hardwood Corporation Limited with its forest certification, which focuses on the sustainable management of resources and chain of custodies. This will ensure that our mahogany products can access lucrative markets, which will in turn help increase the sector's contribution to Fiji's economy. Honorable Speaker say, on this occasion, I wish to inform this august House that Honorable Mitiel Bulanau's statement on the mahogany industry yesterday was not only misleading, but also irresponsibly misguiding the mahogany landowners. Honorable Bulanau obviously plucked his fingers from thin air, but I'm happy to share the correct production figures as follows. In 2017, the industry produced 2,005 cubic meters. In 2018, the production increased to 15,587 cubic meters. And again, it increased in 2019 to 19,801 cubic meters. In 2020, due to COVID-19, the production figures are currently at 7,359 cubic meters. However, it is expected that the industry will produce an additional 20,000 cubic meters in next 5 months. Additionally, and importantly, I'm pleased to share with the august House that FHL has now received confirmed orders from both domestic and overseas markets for the next 5 years. FHL is also positioned to achieve a harvesting quota of 80,000 cubic meters or more each year. Honorable Bulanauda also misquoted the reforestation figures. FHL has replanted over 4,000 hectares and not 509 hectares. Yesterday afternoon, Honorable Mikael Lewere also made some misconstrued remarks on the support to the landowners. And just before morning tea today, Honorable Nicola Waikula made general and again misplaced remarks on the budget as not being a stimulus for the primary industries. It is highly irresponsible of the honorable members on the other side of the House to misinform the august House and the nation. The truth, Honorable Speaker say, is that the Fiji Hardwood Corporation has always empowered landowners in numerous ways, including and especially economically by meaningfully engaging them in both harvesting and reforestation of mahogany leased land. Reforestation, in particular, is reserved solely for the landowners. FHL is also working closely with the Fiji Mahogany Trust to set up landowner business to actively participate in the mahogany industry. And Mr. Bulanauda is fully aware he was the former chairman of the Fiji Mahogany Trust. Together, they have helped landowners in Nukurua, Reketi, Sawakasa, Senganga, with the latest being the Nandaribatu landowner who will commence logging operations tomorrow. FHL had given the rights to the landowners to be the main logging contractor. In addition, FHL continues to provide assistance to landowners for village building projects, jobs for plantation maintenance, and church buildings materials in Serua. Honorable Speaker said, like any new business, the mahogany industry is taking a while to grow. But with the flourishing relations between FHL, FMT, and the landowners, it is anticipated that this growth will gain momentum as we secure markets that will result in the injection of more money into the pockets of the landowners and into the economy. The forest certification for Mahogany, in addition to improvements in the licensing system, log pricing, and ongoing landowner involvement, will provide the catalyst for sustainable growth in the industry. Honorable Speaker said the ministry estimates that there will be a surplus of timber products from the maritime islands while the housing rehabilitation is completed. To help prepare for the influx of timber, the ministry is now able to issue export licenses within 24 hours through investments in technology as part of our business processes re-engineering. The new budget will also enable the ministry to develop online applications for all its other licensing procedures to facilitate the ease of doing business. Importantly, the ministry will continue to explore opportunities for targeted programs in the forestry sector based on public-private partnership. Honorable Speaker said a combined 2.2 is provided for research and development, both on silviculture and on timber utilization. The ministry intends to strengthen its research capabilities through smart partnership with research institutions locally and internationally. Its findings will help support the sustainable management of our forest resources, emphasizing the notion that our work must be informed by science. Honorable Speaker said, in our efforts to provide the many uses of forest, the ministry has secured over 400,000 to maintain the Doloisuba Forest Park and other nature reserves around the country. These reserves are aimed at protecting forest areas and biodiversity, providing opportunities for research, education, and recreation. The ministry plans on extending the economic ecotourism concept to attract the increasing number of environmentally and climate change conscious travelers, both domestically and when our borders are open. Honorable Speaker said, the opposition and various so-called economists have criticized the budget, but they have not done so in measured terms. They have not provided viable alternatives that will help create realistic opportunities to reposition the Fijian economy to operate under the new normal. Their criticism and judgments cannot change the fact that at this juncture in the Fijian economy, there cannot be a smarter and more responsive budget than this. Honorable Speaker says, with government's belief that all Fijian families matter and no one should be left behind, my ministry will effectively mobilize its allocated budget and programs to deliver an effective response to the pandemic, improve our mandatory functions, and ensure we build back better. As the world battles the COVID-19 pandemic, it is increasingly clear that restructuring our economy with nature-based solutions is needed for this required quantum shift. Honorable Speaker say, after visiting over 200 villages since the National Tree Planting Initiative was launched in January last year, I know that when Fijians unite in the face of challenges, our nation will emerge stronger and better than before. I also know that when Fijians work together, there is very little that we can not achieve. I repeat, when Fijians work together, there is very little that we cannot achieve. And I speak not only for this side of the House, but also for some members of the other side. In my recent visit to Honolulu, I saw this unity, especially with Fiji's tree planting revolution. The support from Honorable Niko Nawekula's village in Buda Bay, Honorable Mosese Bulitabu's village in Korowiri, and Honorable Ratute Vita Numatewalu's village in Namuka suggest that they are finally coming to terms with the realities of life. The three honorable members are taking the lead role in mobilizing their communities towards tree planting. I urge them to continue the good work not only in supporting Fiji's tree planting revolution, but also in supporting government's visionary plans that are aimed at providing a sound recovery from the global pandemic and laying the platform for a secure future for our people. This will be one of the noble things they could do for God and country. Honorable Speaker Say, in supporting the 2020-21 budget, I call on all Fijians to unite and help with the transformation into a more resilient and stronger people and nation.
I thank the Minister for Forestry for his contribution to the debate, and I now call upon the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, yesterday the Honourable Prime Minister talked about Biman's breakfast. So, therefore, I wish to report to the Honourable Prime Minister that I actually had 2 cups of coffee with my breakfast this morning. I do not know, Mr. Speaker, if the Fiji Times will report this, but if the Honourable Prime Minister had bacon and eggs for breakfast, the Fiji Sun would report that the PM also had a piggery and raised the chickens. Every year, Honourable Speaker, I respond to the budget address and I focus on the same problems. These problems never change. And the root cause of them, in my view, Honourable Speaker, and in the view of many other people in this country, is the poor leadership of this government. I've heard the Honourable MPs, ministers from the other side praise the leadership, but I suppose, Honourable Speaker, they have to do that as part of their job. This year, the Honourable Minister talks about boldness and courage. Mr. Speaker, it does not take courage to cut import duty on luxury cars and electric hair dryers. There is no courage here, there is panic. As my colleague yesterday, Honourable Andre Jale, said, the Minister and his government turned up to Parliament more than an hour later to deliver the budget address with no apology and no explanation. This is not courage, this is not boldness. This is disarray and disorganization. Even on budget night, Mr. Speaker, this government did not know what it was doing. Mr. Speaker, it takes courage to face the people and say, we are sorry. We are sorry that for years we've been spending our way into massive debt. And we are sorry that when you have lost your jobs and incomes, we cannot help you. This is what this government should say to the people of Fiji. The Honourable Prime Minister jokes about what I had for breakfast, but if he reads the Fiji Times, he will know the truth, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of children have had no breakfast. They are going hungry right now. But he also knows that people are tired about all the government's talk and no action. They know hungry children cannot wait, so people are taking actions themselves. The real leaders of our country, Mr. Speaker, I dare say, are no longer in government. They are outside, and they are this side. Mr. Speaker, it does not take boldness and courage for this government to go into debt. They know that they will not be around to fix the problem. The Honourable Economy Minister knows it. We all know it. The government, we all know, Mr. Speaker, that the economy is not the only thing on life support. In fact, the future of Fiji First government is on life support. Mr. Speaker, it is too late to fix the situation we are in. The damage has been done, and I want to focus on the future and the economic solution Fiji needs. But before we go there, Mr. Speaker, we need to understand where we are and how we got here. Only then can we understand what must really change. It is very important to tell the truth to the people of this country because they need to know the truth. First, the government has no economic vision for Fiji. It just makes up things as they go along. Suddenly they have abolished stamp duty. Suddenly it has reduced taxes on alcohol. Suddenly it has changed the tax incentives for tourism investment. Every year, Mr. Speaker, mystery surrounds each budget. Nobody knows what is coming. Of course, the Honourable Minister likes it this way because that makes him the centre of attention, I guess. But this is, Mr. Speaker, bad for economic certainty and continuity. And we all know this. We all know this. Investors know this. Investors do not know what is coming. They cannot plan ahead. And whatever happens this year, they know it can easily change the following year. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget of panic. After years of ignoring the tourism industry, the government has decided to cut tourism taxes. We had warned the government. We had warned the government many times in the last 4 years. Honourable Gavoka did the same. The government has decided to cut tourism taxes now. It's abolishing business licenses and stamp duty. All this it says is to make the economy more efficient. But for almost 15 years, Mr. Speaker, almost for 15 years, the government has been running the economy. It has refused to listen to anybody else. The government always knows best. So why has it suddenly started talking about making the economy more efficient now? This year, the government has taken the so-called bold measures. But Mr. Speaker, many people that I talk to, many businesses, they don't believe that this will stay. There is no permanence. Because next year they will want to raise more money. Government will want to raise more money. They will just bring back those things that they've rolled back, like stamp duty and business licenses. They will just call them something different. They will lift the tourism taxes again. This is all what people and investors are saying. Second, Mr. Speaker, the government has no money. Last year, the government's own calculations were $1 billion below budget. That is therefore anybody, this is like before anybody in this country or anywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, heard anything about the coronavirus. And this is the truth that they need to tell the people. They need to go out and tell the people. They can't just put all the blame on what has happened. The economy was in trouble well before the coronavirus. What happened to the economic boosting and the Bainimarama boom that we had last year? The truth is out now. The economy did not grow last year. It actually went backwards. It was minus 1.3%. The economy was already crashing. Third, Mr. Speaker, the government keeps borrowing money. For years we have warned about the state of government debt. They were telling us we didn't understand debt sustainability. The government has spent like there is no tomorrow, and this year that tomorrow has come. We now face the biggest economic crisis Fiji has faced in 50 years as an independent nation, and the government has no money to help. The government is telling the people, Mr. Speaker, telling the people who have been made unemployed, we will give you $220 per fortnight, but this is not the government's money. This is the people's money. This is what is in the FNPF balances. Government is topping up some people's balances, but with whose money? The World Bank's money, the IMF's money, the Asian Development Bank's money, because our own government, Mr. Speaker, has run out of money well before the coronavirus. But Mr. Speaker, there will be more crises. Climate change means more crisis. They understand that. In the last 20 years, Suba has not been, thank God, not been hit by earthquake or other natural disasters. But one day, if it does, where will the money come from then? Somewhere, sometime down the line, everything is likely to crash with the way this government is going, Mr. Speaker. It will be a double disaster. The government will have so much debt that it will have to again tax the people hard and to pay it back. and people who need the FNPF to look after them in their old age will have nothing to live on. But Mr. Speaker, this government does not care, because this government knows that when this happens, it will be somebody else's problem. Mr. Speaker, let us understand the headline figures in this budget. My colleagues on this side have talked about this. 2 years ago, it was 3.2 billion. In the year just ended, government raised only 2.7 billion. Now it's down to 1.6 billion. That's understandable. This coming year, the government must repay 1.2, Mr. Speaker, about $1.2 billion in loans and interest. 1.2 billion. That's the fact. That's in the budget estimates. Every Fijian should understand how bad our situation is. It's very important for our people to understand that. Every month next year, government will have to raise almost 100 million just to pay off loans. $100 million per month just to pay off loans. This is before the government can spend $1 on bandages for our hospitals and textbooks for our school children. Apparently, Mr. Speaker, while people go hungry, the Honorable Prime Minister must have a new office. I don't accept this idea that, when you have a bigger priority, that you need to engage in construction. The economics of it we understand, but what is the priority right now? The priority is something else. This is a government which does not understand priority. But even he must pay off this year's loan before he can pay the concrete. And how are we going to pay the rest of the government to run, Mr. Speaker? We are going to borrow more. We are going to borrow more, and indeed another $2 billion more, Mr. Speaker. And what are we going to do in the year after that? Because the government says it will only collect 1.8 billion next year, and the same amount in the year after that. But this is what the government tells us about next year. This is in the budget supplement, Mr. Speaker. This is what the government tells. In the coming year, it says it will spend 3.6 billion. Then it promises that it will spend about 2.3 billion, that's the target for the 2021-22 target, and then 2.2 billion in 2022-23 target. Now the question is, Mr. Speaker, this government is going to cut spending next year in the following year's budget by 1.3 billion. I want to ask the ministers, when that 1.3 billion cut comes, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? If that is the case, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the Prime Minister that he should cut his cabinet size to 5. Save some millions of dollars to do other things, because the ministers will have no budget. They will have nothing to do. The permanent secretaries can run the show. But Mr. Speaker, let me say this. There is an election coming in 2022-23. And we all know what this means for the Fiji First government. Big spending, freebies, and strategies to win votes. So this expenditure that has been projected is not going to be around. So the government will keep spending and will keep borrowing, and Fiji will get deeper and deeper into debt. By the end of this government's term, Mr. Speaker, and I predict by the end of 2022, I predict that Fiji's debt to GDP ratio could well be about 100% or higher. And that is the reality that I want to tell the people of this country. More and more of our money, there is plenty wrong with that, Honorable Prime Minister. More and more of our money will just go to paying our loans. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to look urgently to the future. What will we get, or what will get us out of this mess? We need economic strategies that deal with our short-term and our long-term problems. Let's begin our short-term problems. These are stark. The worst short-term problem is people are going hungry in this country, Mr. Speaker. This economic crisis means that people are going without food. Nowhere in his speech does the Honourable Minister talk about this, because I think that it will be too embarrassing for the government. So he talks about the global economy, they talk about what's happening in other countries, but nowhere they talk about how to help people who are struggling to put food on the table. But everyone in Fiji knows. Ask school owners like TISS Sangam, who are preparing lunches for students. Ask ordinary citizens like Alan Lockington and Mr. Narayan Reddy of Lotoka. They have gathered a group together to supply groceries to hundreds of families in the Lotoka area. Also afflicting the lives of hundreds of rural women for more than a decade is Shashi Kiran of Friends, who is now expanding her work to look after the underprivileged. I was astounded, Mr. Speaker, that a person of her character and credibility was ridiculed as having a political agenda yesterday by Honorable Minister Bala through his interjections. Ask Mrs. Samima Ali about how women and children are struggling to put food on the table. Ask the people who are supplying food parcels to hungry families in Lemi. These are the real problems our poorest people are facing, Mr. Speaker. And while ordinary citizens work to solve this problem, the government looks the other way. People in FNPF may have get access to their money. They may even get some top-up from the aid money government is receiving. But what about farmers, fishermen, casual workers like gardeners, house helpers? Their income depends on others having money, and who will help them? All over the country, ordinary citizens, religious and charitable organizations have stepped in to fill the gap. They have spoken up. They have told the government what is really happening. These are people with skills and experience, deep social networks, and the passion to help others. These are the people who should be the government's partners, who can deal with the deep economic and social pain that the poorest in our country are feeling. Why is the government not supporting them? But from the government, nothing. No money, no support, not even encouragement, not even thanks for the work they are doing. The Honourable Minister just pretends that they are not there. Mr. Speaker, every day the government has the opportunity to partner with civil society, not just in times of crisis, every day in education, in welfare, in issues like health and domestic violence, but every day the government is looking the other way. Because of how this government thinks, only the government may control things. Only the government may get the credit for helping others. The first thing we need, Mr. Speaker, long-term partnerships, people working together, our people helping others of our people, and government supporting this with cash and good policies. Every day, Mr. Speaker, is a missed opportunity. Next, Mr. Speaker, what are we doing with our own time now? Tens of thousands of people have lost their jobs. Many of them have skills that they could pass on to others. These are skills like basic numeracy, literacy, like budgeting, better health and nutrition, growing food, protecting the environment. These are all skills we should be building for the future. Why isn't the government starting programs to build skills while people have the time to acquire these skills? Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is time for us to share in making economic policy. We've talked about for many years. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition talked about it. We need a National Economic Summit process to discuss future economic policy, not a one-day workshop. Economic Summit to chart an economic vision and carry it out. This is how we start, Mr. Speaker. The economy belongs to us, everyone. It belongs to employers, workers, to the richest and the poorest. It does not belong to this government or to a single minister. For example, Mr. Speaker, we need to ask, what is the future of the sugar industry? Thousands of people still depend on it. The industry is supposed to have been reformed. There is a new mechanical harvester here and there, and a new feeder road upgrade. This is not reform. Government has been talking about reform for many years. There is hardly any reform there. We are still producing bulk sugar to sell at prices below our cost of making it. And we are selling it to people who don't even want to buy it now. Our business model has not changed for over 100 years. The government has been talking about for the last 13 years. But the world has changed, and Fiji has also changed. And many people, Mr. Speaker, are tired of supporting the sugar industry because they see no change there. Why is there no conversation about what must change? We've talked about this many times, joint parliamentary committees, etc. Mr. Speaker, now we are going to encourage new industries like agriculture, outsourcing services, and new technology. The government seems to think that this can just be fixed through tax incentives and everything will be fine. But that thinking, Mr. Speaker, has been an absolute failure. Just on Sunday, I don't know whether the Honourable Minister for Education watched that My TV program. In fact, the 5 commentators there, Mr. Speaker, talked about the dire state of Fiji's education system and the need for change. I wonder if the Minister is rethinking about the idea of Education Commission to look at the whole education system in this country that we've talked about. And I think this is probably not a bad time to think about an education commission. Mr. Speaker, the solutions we have suggested, our colleagues have suggested, and many of them have highlighted some very, very specific areas where government can look at it. But every day, those solutions are becoming more and more relevant. We've suggested this before to the government, and of course the government's response we all know. Mr. Speaker, this is a time of severe economic crisis. We need a government that is not afraid to ask for help and new ideas. They need to have the courage. They are in government, they are in power. Asking the opposition, asking those who criticize them is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's a sign of strength, or it will be a sign of strength for this government to ask for help. We need the leadership of a government that will bring together all of our people to pool our best ideas for a common and economic social vision. We wrote to the Honourable Prime Minister, and we know his reply in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I would urge the government to show some leadership, show courage, show boldness, shed the ego, shed the arrogance, and bring people together. But we know, I want to tell the people of this country, Mr. Speaker, that that will not happen until this government is gone. And Mr. Speaker, most people in this country today are now praying for that day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad for his contribution to the debate, and I now call upon the Assistant Minister for Education, Heritage and the Arts, the Honourable Joseph Nand. You have the floor, sir.
Honourable Speaker, Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Economy, Honourable members of this Parliament, respected fellow Fijians watching live on the Fijian government Facebook page and other media outlets. It is my honor and privilege to stand in this August House and deliver my supportive response to 2020-2021 Fijian National Budget. However, Honourable Speaker, before I do that, allow me to take a moment to thank the Almighty God for His interminable blessings to our beloved nation. To free us from the grips of COVID-19, which turned out to be one of the deadliest pandemics at the global level. And having said that, I wish to admirably salute our Honourable Prime Minister for stewarding this nation in these trying times with great passion, commitment and enthusiasm. Mr. Speaker, I would like to declare my full support for 2020-21 Fijian National Budget. The Attorney General and Minister of Economy, Honourable Ayah Said Kayum, should be commended for announcing a scintillating national budget which turned our worries into comfort and increased the level of optimism and hope around the country. The Minister of Economy and his vibrant team for developing a budget which is undoubtedly the best in these current circumstances. It has left many critics and financial commentators flat-footed in terms of what the budget has offered for all Fijians. The economy team was on the ground from day one, talking to Fijians and determining what they needed before putting it into the budget. And this is very important exercise because it gave the Fiji First government a clear picture of the situation and allowed us to make proper allocations of resources. Also not forgetting the commitment by other ministers, members of the government and each and every Fijian who has risen above the occasion to battle this virus and its impact. Had we failed to act promptly, we would have had another story, a sad story about Fiji, just like some big renowned powerhouse nations in this world, which are currently struggling to find their footing in terms of COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm sure the lessons learned through this impacts of the COVID-19 have now made every Fijian even stronger than what we used to be. While many said that they never expected such a bold budget, I am saying, Honourable Speaker, that it is not a surprise budget that I am saying, because the Bainimarama and the Fiji First government is very competent in turning things around. We have done it with many government, statutory and private institutions around the country that has suffered heavily before us. We did it again after TC Winston wreaked havoc across our beautiful country. We always come through when the welfare of our people is concerned. Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight some concerning behavior by the other side of the House and many unelected failed politicians before the budget announcement. The opposition from the very beginning put themselves before the safety of the well-being of the Fijians. Not once did I hear a single idea or a good suggestion from the other side. From day one, they began the political take, blaming everything on us while we worked very hard for the benefit of the Fijians. The opposition was so desperate that they went through signs out of the window and tried to scare the people of Serua that the trade winds would put them at risk of COVID-19. While we laugh, Mr. Speaker, say, the creation of fear and panic during emergencies is not a joke. But there is more. Honorable Bimala Prasad, learned professor, was quoted in Fiji Times article asking for pay cut for all civil servants. When he was called out, he flatly denied it. And that's on record, Mr. Speaker. That's on record. That's on record, Mr. Prasad, Honorable Prakash. But on the same request by made on the NFP website, and it was shared for the world to see. Samnathan Urumbe was another politician who called for the civil servants' pay to cut, and we know better. We found our way without taking into account the ridiculous suggestions by many in the opposition. Civil servants are people too, and they need protection from COVID-19, just like the rest of the speaker, Mr. Speaker, say. That is such a silly suggestion, and we disregarded it. Mr. Speaker, say, it is very interesting to see that at the announcement of this budget, many had to go from left to right, from top to bottom of the budget, just to find if there is anything that could be criticized. It is very sneaky, Mr. Speaker, say. They know that COVID-19 has placed us in hard times, and instead of help, they try to make the people of Fiji worried. They take small parts of the budget, which conveniently ignoring many other incentives that supplements this. In many cases, like with the cane payments, they completely failed to understand how it works and started spreading fake news. Many sitting across the floor are guilty of this, Mr. Speaker, say. Honorable Speaker, say, the Fiji First government has once again shown the country that it stands with people whenever the need arises. We put Fijians first. It is true and genuine attribute of leadership in order to protect its people. Furthermore, there is a big smile on teachers who upgraded themselves with qualifications, and they will now be remunerated better as per their new and improved qualification. And this does not stop here. The very same increment is going to be backdated. Adding another layer of icing on the cake. As we said before, and would like to say once again, the Fiji First government shall continue to strive through various means to improve the quality of teachers, and to remunerate teachers who have upgraded themselves is the only way for them. Mr. Speaker, say, yesterday, Honorable Temum Kepa made a lot of inaccurate claims. She had completely missed the point, and she established that she was misleading the parliament with false figures and claiming that students are somehow being defrauded. As a former Minister of Education, she should be knowing better. Or maybe she doesn't know better because she couldn't provide free education to all Fijians during her time. Maybe this is why she failed in her time as a minister. What she does seem to be good at is misleading parliament, using innocent children as political tools. Students will continue to receive free tuition, free textbooks, subsidized transport, such as our bus fare scheme. In short, Fijian children will continue to receive all the benefits of a free education that was promised and delivered by the Fiji First government. And I remind you, this is the first time in Fiji strategy that such initiative has been implemented. Together with free education, free textbook and transport assistance, we shall continue to provide access to quality education to all students of Fiji. Honorable Speaker, say, our tertiary education loan scheme, or TELS, will go through some good policy changes in order to raise the qualifying standards for students at lower cost. For starters, only students who earn above 250 and in the year 10 exams will qualify. We are also lowering TELS and topper scholarship available, along with some other necessary measures and plugs. However, this shall have no impact on those who are still paying. Furthermore, to ensure that the government supports is strengthened in this trying time, the repayments will remain suspended until the end of 2021. Mr. Speaker, say, throughout the pandemic, the Fijian government has kept Fijians well informed. Through the Fijian government Facebook page and other social media says, we have ensured that hundreds of thousands of Fijians are aware of what is going around them. From health tips to a few times. Never before have Fijians been able to access and engage with their government. Globally, the top organizations have already begun to shift away from using third-party sources to tell their stories or circulate information. While the Fijian government page supplemented by the ministry pages were able to disseminate a wide range of information across the entire Fijian audience. Again, the Attorney General must be commended for setting up these assets to help Fijians through another spectrum. Mr. Speaker say, while few critics are still scratching their heads and trying to come in terms in order to digest this bold, best and beautiful budget, there are already celebration amongst Fijians, which is very evident through their trademark Bula smile. If any one of us is set amongst the ordinary Fijians, after the announcement of the national budget, you will impartially know what I am talking about. Mr. Speaker said, why the opposition and the mouthpiece Fiji Times are panicking? They do not want the Fijian people to be happy, especially if the source of their happiness is the government they voted for. It is simple trick really. If the Fijian budget has 100 good benefits that supplements and benefits that have existed before, they will instead choose a single one and try to attack it. My 20 stories out of nothing. They never said that free education, subsidized electricity and water are providing much relief to the Fijians. Instead, you will see poorly researched attacks and naysaying. Mr. Speaker say, you would think that having failed with this tragedy that lies into elections, oppositions and its partners would try to change things up. What's worse is the denial when they are called out. Everybody already knows the opposition and its partners are about. Denying it makes it sad instead of funny, Mr. Speaker say. Mr. Speaker say, despite long-awaited and poorly researched attacks that we have had on the budget, we would have known and require reductions. The Fiji First government will continue working hard for our people and for all Fijian people. Therefore, before retiring to my seat, Honourable Speaker say, I wish to put this on record that I duly support this budget, which was delivered on 17th of July 2020 by Minister of Economy, Honourable Yasir Kuhil. The budget is best way to revamp the Fijian economy after COVID-19 impact. And I congratulate the Minister of Economy for this fine piece of work.
Order.
That was a good call. With this, I wish everyone in the respected House a healthy deliberation on this 2021 national budget. May God bless Fiji and every Fijian. Thank you.
I thank the Assistant Minister for Education, Heritage and Arts for his contribution to the debate, and I now call upon the Honourable Lenora Tirangere-Tamur. You have the floor, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget kind of got off to a bad start. I reckon the Honourable Minister for the Economy turns up late. He delayed his delivery by more than an hour, did not explain himself, did not apologize, and I just want to express my utter disgust at his behavior. The big deal about the 1 hour, Honourable Prime Minister, is that people were waiting for Your Highness. The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, is the servant of Fiji's people.
Order.
And the representatives of those people are the members of this House. To all the people who are waiting to watch on TV, to all the people who consumed their mobile data waiting for him to turn up, he behaved disrespectfully and arrogantly. In that, at least, he behaved in the character of some of this government. Even the Prime Minister has had trouble turning up on time to COVID-19 briefings. As most of us know, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Economy Minister is famous for being late to many public functions. He acts as if he's the only person with important things to do in this country. I remind him again, we pay him more than $200,000 a year to be our servant. The people and not him are the important ones here. And I remind him of the old saying, manners maketh the man, and it is high time he showed some. Now I want to offer my respect and gratitude to the real leaders of our country, the many people and groups, both in Fiji and abroad, who, with compassion as their only motive, have rallied, organized, collected, and oftentimes spent their own savings to reach hungry and desperate families, feed school children, and help rebuild homes. I want to thank all the faith-based organizations with the school feeding programs. People and groups including Global Compassion, the Langi Langi Relief Fund, Nayau Strong, the Ono Foundation of the USA, Mr. Narayan Reddy and Mr. Alan Lockington and their group of friends and donors in Lautoka, the Kandavu Pango Pango Association, the volunteers at the Lami District Council of Social Services, as well as all the companies who have supplied their staff with groceries. The list is long, Honorable Speaker. To them, I say, you are the real leaders. You are the people who give up your time for others. You are the people who understand who is important. Mr. Speaker, the minister's budget speech was interesting, both for what he said and for what he did not say. But one thing is clear. It has taken this COVID-19 crisis to show up the stark reality of what many, including the NFP and the opposition, have been saying all along. This is a government that has been reckless and wasteful. It has stubbornly refused to accept advice from anyone. It behaves as though one man knows everything. At a time when we should be encouraging local production and saving foreign exchange, the budget encourages cheaper imports. Our local producers and manufacturers will have to fight against these cheaper imports. And it's not just tourism jobs that are disappearing. Manufacturing workers' jobs are at risk as well. Ordinary families are struggling to put basic food on the table. What use to them are duty cuts on imported foodstuff and all these gems and cars? Why reduce duty on imported vegetables when we should be driving consumption towards what our local farmers are growing in abundance? At times like this, you will see us consumers pull back our expenditure to bare necessities. Mr. Speaker, year upon year in the budget speech, we hear about how well the government is doing, how much it is spending on this program or that program, and how much people's lives are improved. But this is a government that has been big on talk and small on delivery. The government is suspending its $1,000 parenthood assistance payment. Who could forget their pre-election baby freebie? But now the votes are in, the freebies are out. Mr. Speaker, did you know that since November last year, Fiji women have not been able to get a pap smear in this country? Why? Because the laboratories do not have the filters to carry out proper tests. Why? Is it because we have not paid our bill to a certain supplier? What's happening at the new maternity ward at the Colonial War Memorial Hospital, the groundbreaking ceremony for which was carried out by the Honorable Prime Minister in June 2018? I note that the World Bank has this year approved funding of US $7.4 million to further support the government of Fiji's strengthening of our health systems in the wake of this COVID emergency. The project will provide additional medical supplies, including personal protective equipment, intensive care unit beds and ventilators as well, and this jumped out at me, as well as the installation of a medical incinerator that will serve 3 divisional hospitals in Fiji, including the CWM. Now, Mr. Speaker, when fire broke out at the Colonial War Memorial Hospital's boiler room in May last year, the hospital's incinerator was also badly affected. Now, since then, where has the hospital waste from CWM, including from accident and emergency and operating theatres, been going? God forbid it's been going to the Namboro landfill. Has it? Can anyone from this side of the House, hand on heart, say that this is not so? Instead of trying to lure tourists to Fiji with $60 million in tourist freebies, please buy basic supplies for the hospitals. Even last week, people on social media wanted to know why our hospitals could not even supply bandages. What about basic drugs and medications? We can offer 400 people to a tourist to visit Fiji, but we cannot look after the basic health and dignity of our people? I agree, Mr. Speaker, when the Minister for Economy said during his budget speech, and I quote, target resources on families facing the most severe hit to their finances, unquote. So let's do that. How can we be allocating $250,000 for Fiji Day celebrations when tens of thousands of our workers and their families have nothing to celebrate? Mr. Speaker, there are parents in this country who cannot afford to give their kids 3 balanced meals a day. I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that Fiji marks October 10th by calling for a week of national prayer and fasting, a reflection and reconciliation. I suggest that the government give the $250,000 to the likes of EFCOS or FRIEND or the NGOs working hard to support our people, giving support to the huge number of Fijians dealing with hunger and mental health issues as a result of unemployment and poverty. Let's talk about education now, Honourable Speaker. For TELS, 130 new awards for the MBBS, oral and dental will be suspended, Mr. Speaker. This has left dozens of students and their parents bitterly disappointed. After years of studying hard, aiming for a TELS award for an MBBS program, they are dealt this blow. The TELS qualifying marks based on year 13 results have been raised from 200 to 250. TELS Technical College student entry age has also been increased from 15 to 17 years. What happened? As for our beloved teachers, well, the much hoped for MyAPA results for Fiji's roughly 1,300 teachers was a huge letdown for them. 98% of Fiji's teachers did not qualify for a step increase. And let me read a little bit of what a teacher read when he opened his MyAPA page. MyAPA performance assessment process for the 2017-2018 performance year has been finalized. After review of all eligibility, criteria for the MyAPA, it was determined that you met all eligibility criteria. This teacher's heart went, yes, and then he read on. The moderation subcommittees met to moderate the result of all eligible employee, and they carefully reviewed the evidence provided in a MyAPA and considered the results report submitted by your work unit. On conclusion of this moderation process, it was determined that you had not provided sufficient evidence in your MyAPA to support a step increase. In this regard, your salary band and step will remain as at present. But wait, Mr. Speaker, it gets better. It gets better. To add insult to injury, teachers have been given 5 working days to appeal the decision. 5 working days after being made to wait for more than 2 years. What happened? Minister Akbar then went on to say that teachers who had qualified got paid their 2017 and 2018. And I quote, she also said, 2018 and 2019 assessments are still pending, and as announced in the last budget by the Attorney General, the 2018-19 assessment is still on hold. What happened? Do you remember the time when the government boasted about how senior citizens were receiving subsidized bus fares at $40 a month, then suddenly dropped to $20 a month? Now it's going to be $10 a month. 2 nights ago, I got a call from a lady in Nandi who needs to travel from her Nandi home to the Lautoka Hospital for her eye clinic. And this is a trip that she needs to make 3 times a month. But one round trip costs $8. For all the inconvenience that this failed policy has caused our elderly, not to mention our students, you may as well just allow travelers to choose to pay cash. Let's talk about housing. There is no good time to remove funding assistance to the vulnerable. There is no worse time to make cuts than when the economic fallout from a pandemic is affecting vulnerable families. It is not the middle classes and the upper classes who are hurting, Mr. Speaker. Not when the duty on luxury goods is going down. It is the poorest who are paying the price in this budget. Removing funding for housing upgrades for persons living with disabilities will only increase the vulnerability of an already extremely marginalized and largely ignored portion of the Fijian population, including our elderly. It will further increase the burden on women who are inevitably the carers of our sick and disabled. This means that mothers may not be able to go and earn an income. Daughters may not be able to attend school. This will directly strike at a family's ability to meet everyday needs. It will reduce women's access to employment and education. Mr. Speaker, 91% of Fijians with disabilities require structural modifications to improve their homes and living environment. The severity of impairments increase exponentially without such improvements to their house being made, to the point that people can die because of difficulties that could easily be mitigated with home improvements. 13.7% of all Fijians live with a disability, and this doesn't include the elderly or the amputees, however many there are per day during diabetes, due to diabetes. All amputees will require some form of modification to their home for them to be able to live with some dignity. The loss of this funding to Habitat for Humanity will mean that persons with disabilities may have to wait 5 to 7 years to get assistance from private benefactors. Many may not get any assistance at all. Let me turn our attention, Honourable Speaker, to tropical cyclone Harold relief. And Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about this tin fish. This tin fish, okay? This tin fish. This brand tin fish, which was part of government's tropical cyclone Harold relief to Kandavu. The Prime Minister himself, I believe, took this to Kandavu. Mr. Speaker, I invite everyone in this House to open a can of this and take a whiff. Do it and tell me if you would give this to your own family. Well, I invite all those who haven't, come up to the opposition chambers. I have opened this and it is sitting there in the fridge and it is marked, do not eat. Our people deserve a better leader than one who goes to rural communities, handing out substandard food, bottles of oil which have already been opened, all the while asking communities if Honourable Rasova has been to visit them and chastising them for not voting for him. This from our Honourable Prime Minister. On June the 20th, 2018, Honourable Speaker, the Malaysian Ministry of Health banned this very brand, took them off supermarket shelves. Why? Because this fish, tin fish, had been found to contain roundworms. And yet this is what our government gave to people in Kandavu and God knows wherever else. Mr. Speaker, when times are good, you will always find government ministers taking credit. The Honourable Minister for the Economy always photographed at the Fiji Airways handing out bonus checks. But when it came to making Fiji Airways staff redundant, he and the rest of the government were nowhere to be seen. This was also true of the Fiji Airways executive team. Sitting high up there in their air-conditioned executive suites, they terminated people by email. They did not follow the collective agreements with the unions. They did not offer solace, empathy, or support. Good leaders would face their employees and explain the problem. But as soon as the tough gets going, they get going too. These executives and our ministers were nowhere to be seen. And let us not forget our government's shocking and dishonest treatment of patient number 1. Mr. Speaker, this is how this government treats the workers who have been the face of this country to the world. Mr. Speaker, I know this government doesn't like to hear what we on this side have to say, no matter what we say. So perhaps they should read the numerous letters published in the dailies. And here is an excerpt of a letter from a gentleman by the name of Mr. Chand. And he wrote, and I quote, "May I add to this list the issues of governance, transparency, and trust. The countries that have been most successful in dealing with the pandemic are those that seem accountable, practice transparency, and are trusted by their citizens. This is achieved through accurate flow of information, robust data, timely response to issues raised by the people, and there is inclusivity and participation in decision-making processes. I believe in Fiji we have a long way to go where the citizens feel comfortable about the information provided. Unless the authorities can be more humble and inclusive in their approach to deal with the social, economic, and environmental issues that we are going to face for many months yet, I am afraid the ability to deal with the immense impacts will remain wanting." Signed by Mr. Altaf Chand. Not long ago, the Honourable Minister for Economy complained about why only 50,000 people had downloaded the Care Fiji app. Let me tell him about the people who have not done it. Half of them, Mr. Speaker, do not trust this government. The other half are just so sick and tired of being talked down to, bullied, patronized, and ordered around by this government that they just simply refuse. They do it as an act of rebellion because that is where the Fiji First Party leadership has taken us. It has taken us to the point where people do not trust the government and will not work with it. This is the ultimate failure of political leadership. Can we, the people, trust this government? No. I have this suspicion, Mr. Speaker, that this government reckons if you keep the people poor enough, you keep them desperate enough to swallow any bait you throw their way before the next elections. This budget reminds me of a 1978 song by Johnny Mathis and Denise Williams. Too much, too little, too late. Mr. Speaker, I do not support this budget, and I and many others are sick of the dishonesty and deceit by many of those promoting it. And I'm reminded of a day in 1653 in England when Oliver Cromwell gave a speech dismissing a parliament that had grown corrupt and lazy. And this is what he said: "It is high time for me to put an end to your sitting in this place, which you have dishonored by your contempt of all virtue and defiled by your practice of every vice. You are a factious crew and enemies to all good government. You are grown intolerably odious to the whole nation. You were deputed here by the people to get grievances redressed, are yourselves become the greatest grievance." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Lenora Gelgera-Tambua for a contribution to the debate. I now give the floor to the Assistant Minister for Rural and Maritime Development and Disaster Management, the Honourable Vijay Nath. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Leader of Opposition, and Honourable Members of Parliament, I wanted to address this August House and contribute to 2020-2021 National Budget debate. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Ministry of Rural and Maritime Development and Disaster Management has been allocated with $16.6 million for the new financial year. This is in the Rural Development Program as well as the National Disaster Management Operations. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have observed in the past 9 months since the commencement of the cyclone period in November 2019, how the National Disaster Management Office and the Divisional Commissioner's Office have worked tirelessly through the various disasters that our beloved country has encountered. The COVID-19 pandemic was obviously the test of our resilience in responding to the different forms of disasters. We acknowledge the great effort put in by the Ministry of Health and Medical Services and our security forces in working with the ministry's team on the ground in identification of preparedness of the isolation facilities for quarantine purposes. Their assistance in the mobilization of resources for the contact tracing and policing of the community ensured that the disaster was contained within the localities of those who were affected. Mr. Speaker, say, I do not need to elaborate about Fiji is very vulnerable to the natural disasters, but allow me to enlighten this House with the cost of damage caused by the several tropical cyclones in the past 10 years. In 2010, Tropical Cyclone Thomas, total damage and losses was valued at approximately $84.3 million, representing 1.4% of the GDP with one casualty. In 2012, TC Evan total damage and losses was valued at approximately $194.9 million, representing 2.74% of GDP. And in 2016, Tropical Cyclone Winston total damage and losses was valued at approximately $194.9 million, representing 19.35% of GDP with 44 casualties. In 2018, TC Gita total damage and losses was valued at approximately $1.2 million, representing 0.012% of GDP with no casualties, followed by TC Kinney with total damage and loss valued at approximately $1.2 million, representing 0.028% of GDP with 2 casualties. And in 2019, the TC Sarai total damage and losses was valued approximately $10.3 million, representing 0.09% of GDP with 2 casualties. And in 2020, TC Tino total damage and losses was valued approximately $3.2 million, representing 0.03% of GDP with 2 casualties, and TC Herald recording approximately $100 million in damage and losses, representing 0.9% of GDP with 1 casualty. In summary, Mr. Speaker, say the total damage and losses recorded in Fiji in the past 10 years were valued at $2.42 billion. Mr. Speaker, say, having said this, I must highlight at the outset the focus of ministry is to coordinate government effort in building resilient and sustainable community. Mr. Speaker, my ministry acknowledged that $0.8 million has been allocated to Prime Minister's Relief and Rehabilitation Fund to ensure that disaster relief and response activities are provided to affected communities during disasters. This funding mechanism has been very effective in past disasters, as it provides funding for immediate response during the onset of any disaster. We are not disheartened with this amount. It may seem relatively small comparing to the damage caused of disasters, as it goes without saying that reprioritization is part of the process when disasters do happen. We are also comforted by the fact that our friends and partners in disasters management have proven their support to the ministry as they are always ready to open their heart during the period of disaster. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, the ministry will continue with its awareness program for disaster preparedness and risk reduction. Mr. Speaker, the National Disaster Management Act 1998 is still being used as guide for the ministry in disaster management operations and to ensure government align to its global commitment, especially the Paris Agreement on Climate Change 2015, Sustainable Development Agenda 2015 to 2030, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030. Mr. Speaker, in order to align with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Ministry is now implementing the National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy, NDRRP. This implementation entails Fiji's achievement on Target E of the Sendai Framework, which focus on the national and local strategies by 2030. The NDMO has been allocated $30,000 to continue consultation with stakeholders and the implementation of streamlining of 122 action activities that dovetails the new era of NDMO's operations. These action activities will spearhead government ministries' response to DRR and showcase the rest of the world that Fiji is taking proactive approach towards disaster management. Mr. Speaker, last year, the Honorable Prime Minister launched the NDRRP, which was followed by 2 national consultations conducted by NDMO. With support from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Australia through the Fiji Program Support Facility, the NDMO has also completed the Central and Western Division sub-national workshops, while the Northern and Eastern Divisions are planned for September this year. The Ministry will ensure that not only are our decisions risk informed, but also engage with our communities about the different roles they play at the outlined in the NDRRP. Mr. Speaker, the NDMO, in collaboration with Japan International Cooperation Agencies, JICA, is piloting a disaster risk reduction municipal plan in Nadi town and is also providing technical assistance in the form of a DRR advisor. This project was embarked to begin early this year. However, it has been delayed due to COVID-19. The Sendai Framework has Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 is designed to support the reduction of existing level of risk and prevent from risk from emerging. The National Disaster Management has been allocated $20,000 to develop the National Disaster Database, which will enable the collision of hazard data and past disaster data for the formulation of risk and hazard impact modeling. The database will allow the National Disaster Management Office to develop risk assessment, methodologies, and the storage of damage assessment data from past and future disasters. Mr. Speaker, we support the initiative of Working Smart launched by the Honourable Minister for Economy. And the database will ensure that we invest ourselves with the more modern means of analyzing crises and implementing evidence-based science-driven decision-making tools. Mr. Speaker, while we are funding the training and awareness activities, we would like to acknowledge that our international donor partners, namely the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Australia, Japan International Cooperation Agencies, JICA, USAID, and the International Federation of Red Cross have come in not only assist to assist implementation of NDRRP, but also help the development of communities-based disaster risk reduction policies. Community-based disaster preparedness activities will play a critical role in developing communities' adaptive capacity and resilience to disasters. The community-based disaster risk reduction training manuals is currently being piloted in selected venues communities in Eastern and Central Division. And it has been developed in partnership with the partners in Community Development Fiji. To date, Mr. Speaker, we have conducted community disaster risk reduction management training in 350 communities in this year, and we are supported by our partners Live and Learn, and we will conduct 9 work in emergency operation centers, training for our civil servants in 9 districts across Fiji. These 9 districts are Nandronga, Tabuni, Sabu-Sabu, Senganga, Lambasa, Rutuma, Sengani, and Tukavesi. The NDMO has been allocated $8,000 for such training, as mandated in the National Disaster Management Act 1998. The aftermath of disasters. The development of this manual will highlight as the recommendation on a lesson learned from T.C. Winston. Mr. Speaker, 15,000 has been allocated towards the awareness program. The NDMO planned to hold the National Disaster Awareness Week in Yasawa this year. Given that the Yasawa group of islands is prone to the impact of tropical cyclone, storm surge, and climate change, this exposure will surely empower the community to become more resilient. Mr. Speaker, government has continued funding for the maintenance of flood early warning systems, which is essential for communities living in flood-prone areas of Nedi, Lotoka, Tavua, Ba, and Singatoka. A total of $10,000 has been allocated for this purpose. Mr. Speaker, in addition, $10,000 is provided to assist the NDMO in carrying out disaster management services. The lesson learned from T.C. Winston was a formulation of the Fiji cluster system, which adopted from the UN cluster system framework in localizing it into the Fiji context. The Fiji cluster system is the government-led humanitarian coordination mechanism. It operates at the national strategy level throughout the disaster risk management cycle. It is also a link to the subnational level humanitarian coordination mechanism led by divisional commissioners. Each sectional cluster is led by permanent secretary of an appropriate ministry, who will be supported by the cluster secretariat to coordinate humanitarian actors within the sector. Mr. Speaker, it is widely known that the context of the disaster is evolving. As such, the upskilling of our DSLOs is also vital. With the support from the Australian government through the Register of Engineers for Disaster Relief, a series of training will be done on humanitarian work and cluster support. Mr. Speaker, the total of $80,000 has been allocated for the development of robust emergency communication system. The NDMO is penetrating or partnering with JICA in the setup of the resilient and multi-hazard early warning system. This will include the establishment of new tsunami sirens in populated coastal areas amongst the Lemi Lotoka corridor and selected maritime islands in the Western Division. Further to this, we are also working with Ministry of Communication to the Fiji cluster system to identify black spot areas within the country where further support will be provided to ensure communications is not affected during disasters. Mr. Speaker, additional support from JICA includes the installation of 9 HF radios in this year in the black spot area in Vanuatu, and we are envisioned to cover the remaining spot in Fiji in the near future. The total of $30,000 has been allocated for the maritime and maintenance of emergency equipments. Mr. Speaker, the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been vital active partner in providing funding support to the number of NDMO's initiative. Worth mentioning is the support rendered through the procurement of tsunami siren within the Super Peninsula and technical advisors that currently sits within NDMO. Mr. Speaker, the NDMO is looking at completing the review of the National Disaster Management Act of 1998 towards the end of this year, and also the formulation of disaster regulations and the plan of operationalize the Disaster Act. Other initiative includes the formulation of disaster risk assessment guideline to be used by our development partners and the continued upgrading of disaster communication network and tsunami early warning system. Mr. Speaker, government continues to strongly educate this community's resilience, which will contribute towards sustainable livelihood and in this pressing time of COVID-19. We become robust advocates of leaving no one behind. With this, Mr. Speaker, I commend the Honorable Minister for Economy and his team for the bold and resilient debate. I commend the Minister of Economy and his team for the bold and resilient budget, which I wholeheartedly support. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Assistant Minister for Rural and Maritime Development and Disaster Management for his contribution to the debate, and I now give the floor to the Honourable Adilitia Nkioni-Barab. You have the floor, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to contribute to this current year budget from 1st of August to 31st July 2021. The Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, Ministers of Government, fellow parliamentarians. Much has been said in the last 2 days on the budget that we have been presented with on the 17th of July this year. First of all, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to respond to the Honourable Leader of Opposition. I would like to endorse, the response of the Honourable Leader of Opposition that was delivered yesterday, and that of my colleagues yesterday and today. We agree that this budget may be defined as a well-framed, thought-out, theoretical, deceiving budget, a budget to save face in a crisis situation. It is an irresponsible, rudderless, and deceitful budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is again a vain attempt at face saving because economic indicators clearly showed a depressed rate of growth well before the arrival of COVID-19 pandemic. Rather than helping those in need of assistance and a handout, this government puts the selfish need to continue to build roads and monuments to prove their greatness. This need to borrow selfishly, made at the expense of families, in particular those who live below the poverty line, sir, those who struggle on the margins of poverty, and the families who face hardship as a result of losing their jobs due to the effects of coronavirus or COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, sir, in face of adversity or crisis, facts and truth matters most. We must unite as a nation, trust each other, and work together to lift our nation out of this crisis. As we were reminded yesterday by Honourable Kurindrani, when the government gives facts and figures, trust goes up. Conversely, lies that try to paint a picture that is different from the harsh reality they face reduce the people's trust and confidence. And distrust and lack of faith in corrosive and damaging to the nation, sir. When government is truthful, there is a boost in confidence in the people, by investors and the whole of the nation. That is why I'm particularly disappointed, Mr. Speaker, with Honourable Koya try to portray this side of the House as anachronistic or anachronism. The people of Fiji are well aware of how the Fiji First government continues to blame past governments for the crisis the nation faces now. The people knew that there was no boom, because if there was, Mr. Speaker, the nation would not be in such dire straits. Honourable Koya also announced a creative economic modelling that results in an average of GDP growth of 3.2% claimed by the Bainimarama government. The truth is, Honorable Speaker, that in economics, as in anything, one must compare apples with apples and not try to compare apples and oranges. The truth, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the average economic growth is 3.2% is achieved if you track the growth rates for the years 2010 to 2019. However, if one compares the growth rates of 2011 to 2020, the average growth rate is 0.75%. So it is obvious that Honorable Koya does not want to account for the projected growth rate for 2020, which RBA predicted in their June 2020 monthly economic update. The truth, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that Mr. Koya and FFP government do not want to take ownership and responsibility for the projected negative 21.7% growth for this year. Any student crunching the figures will see that for the years 2011-2020, the average economic growth is in fact 0.75%, and the Honourable Leader of Opposition deserves an apology and retraction from Honourable Koya for using the Honourable LOP for fabricating figures and manipulating facts. I would also advise Honourable Koya to check the speech of Honourable LOP before making such wild allegations. It is obvious that Honourable Koya does not want to account or take credit for the 2020 economic contraction, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for allowing me to also address the matter that Honourable Maharaj said yesterday regarding the Honourable Turang Lakunamosi's contribution. Honourable Ratu Matanitombua's comments on the allocation for overseas sports tournaments, sir. Perhaps like Mr. Koya, Honourable Maharaj should listen closely or ask the members for their speeches before they make allegations. May I refer Mr. Honourable Alvik to page 1232 of Hansard. The Honourable Martin Tombua states, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, I also acknowledge the 1 million allocation for overseas sports tournament. How realistic is this allocation, taking into account that our borders are still closed? This, sir, is another inappropriate allocation that could have been reduced so that resources can be adequately redirected within the ministry. That was what the Honourable Ratumathan Tumbua said. You will appreciate, Mr. Speaker, sir, that contrary to Honourable Maharaj's attempt to denigrate Honourable Martin Tumbua, in fact, the official record in Hansard will show that Honourable Martin Tumbua asked, why is the allocation needed at all when the international borders and sporting fixtures are not happening? So why $1 million for overseas sporting tournaments? Thank you, Honourable Maharaj. Please listen closely before making wild allegations, or perhaps I could refer you and Mr. Koya to a hearing specialist. Honourable Speaker, sir, our other honourable members from the other side have also made comments in regards to the collapse of the National Bank of Fiji. This is not the first time that honourable government members have brought up the NBF saga in this August House. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Leader of Opposition has made it very clear in this August House and in public statements on the failure of the NBF that as leader, he took full responsibility because he was the Prime Minister. He took the bull by the horn, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are laws covering independent constitutional officers and their respective functional responsibilities. The independence is safeguarded constitutionally to ensure central government does not interfere with their legal mandate. One of these independent institutions is the Reserve Bank of Fiji, which is responsible for the management of our foreign reserves, manage inflation, and to independently monitor the operation of financial institutions. It is sad to note that the independence of such institutions have been marginalized by the Bainimarama government over the last 14 years. Mr. Speaker, sir, the problem with the NBF did not only occur during the SVT period of leadership, but the Honourable Leader of Opposition has confirmed that there are no excuses. He said it was an ongoing problem before he became the Prime Minister. A fair share of the bank's portfolio was concentrated on a few big businesses. When the problem was brought to his attention, he acted swiftly to minimize any further risk. He did not shy away because the savings of citizens of Fiji were at risk. People responsible were taken to task, and some people have served jail sentences. The honourable members should get the facts right and put the issues in the proper context. Honourable Speaker, much has been said on the effects of the budget, in particular to the grassroots people of the nation. There is also an ongoing problem in the continuing use of drugs in our villages, in our communities. That is a problem that also needs to be addressed. I would like to suggest, Mr. Speaker, sir, that under the Ministry of Communication budget for this coming year, let's try to refer to that, head 16, they have an allocation under Seg 7 for digital Fiji of 8 million, almost $9 million, sir. I'd like to suggest, sir, that there is a program that is being organized, managed by the International Youth Group in Fiji, which has also received recognition by government. There has been a number of MOUs signed by 1 or 2 ministries in the government. This is the group that is taking out the mind lectures to prisoners, to communities that have requested for it. That lecture tries to change the mindsets of people, in particular those that continue to take drugs, criminals, Honorable Speaker, sir. They change the mindset through lectures that are based on biblical principles, sir. This is something that needs to be taken to our communities. If we are going to arrest, if we are going to reduce the continuing use of drugs by our people, in our own villages, in communities, we need to take out a program that will help to arrest the problem, that will help them to change their mindset and move away from drugs, Honorable Speaker, sir. The other issues that I'd like to address, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd raised this in the budget contribution in 2019, the matter regarding the Turanginikoro allowance and the Nasinikoro allowance. It is time that government recognize the enormous contribution of the Turanginikoro in the role that they are expected to carry out for government, for non-government organizations, and for the members of the village. They are receiving $100 per month, whilst the Nasinikoro are receiving $200. Not only Nasinikoro, the other community nurses in Fiji. I ask, Honorable Speaker, sir, that consideration be given to increasing the allowance of the Turanginikoro. I heard today that the FNPF should also be paid for the Turanginikoro. Some of these Turanginikoro serve as long as more than 20 years, Honorable Speaker. When they retire, there is nothing else to help them cope with their retirement years, Honorable Speaker, sir. The other matter that I'd like to address, Mr. Speaker, sir, is the need for the human face of the budget. Human face of the budget, sir. We hear of the large sums of money that have been allocated for this program, for that other program, etc. There is an absence of a policy package, Mr. Speaker, sir, that will ensure that our people actually benefit from all this money that has been allocated to the various ministries. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture. There should be policies in introducing mechanization for our farmers in our villages, in rural communities. I'd like to suggest an allocation to buy diggers for each tikina, for each community. This will help the farmers improve their farming plans, get a lot of crops, and it'll increase the export that is needed, the foreign earnings that is needed for our country. That would be a major boost, sir, if policies are devised to ensure that the amounts of money that are being allocated to the ministry actually are effectively used by our people, the disadvantaged people in our society. They've used the Mataiva and the Isivi for many, many years. It's time that they go into mechanized farming. We know and also recognize the program that has been managed by the Ministry of Agriculture in the diggers that are being hired out. But they're only about one per division, or two or three. There isn't enough to ensure that all farmers get to use, get to be assisted in their farming, sir. Some of our people that have been laid off in their employment, they have relocated to their villages, and they are also joining villages in the farming. And the availability of diggers and other planting equipment will also help to improve their planting productivities, as well as increasing the exports that Fiji is very much in need of in order to increase the foreign earnings in our country. Mr. Speaker, sir. I think I will end my address there. For all that I've said, it is clear that I cannot support the budget before the House. As much needs to be done. We need a human face. We need policies that will ensure that our people actually benefit from the budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
I thank the Honourable and the Tiangjin Maravi for contribution to the debate. Honourable members, we will suspend proceedings for lunch and we will resume in an hour's time.